Hi, welcome to Detours Understanding Acquired Nature. And with us, we have Joyce, and we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence.
So take it away. Okay. Hello. I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence. So I'm going to take a leap here and say the majority, if not all, of the brain injured people have emotional intelligence. Okay. So I list them in a minute. The concept of emotional intelligence has been extensively popularized in the lay press and the lay corporate world as individuals who report that the potential ability of emotional intelligence to predict various markers of success. Emotional intelligence is most commonly incorporates concepts of emotional expression. Emotional intelligence is not one or a few, but all of the mindset lesson I'm going to read you. So they include social skills, motivation, empathy, and self-awareness and self-regulation. The first one is social skills. And Mark, you wouldn't mind if I stop every one of them and get your take on it?
Sure.
Okay. The first one is social skills. Is the foremost know where you are, where you're going. Like otherwise you trying to start a long trek without a map. First you won't know how to start. Second, you won't know if you're drawing close to it. And that is to understand the strengths and weaknesses of current social strength and limitations are. Brain injured people, after a while, should know their strengths and limitations. Do you agree with that, Mark?
Well, it really depends on where in the brain they're injured. And there's a big difference between somebody with traumatic brain injury and somebody who's had more focal CVA. If you've had in the more motor areas or you've had parietal or occipital, yeah, I can understand it. But with TBIs, we tend to have more frontal lobe injuries, and that hits like right at the heart of, you know, those very skills. So self-awareness is a big one. And a lot of people with frontal lobe injuries haven't any. They're not even aware they're disabled. A person who's blind with a frontal lobe injury due to trauma denies they're blind, despite evidence to the contrary. And that's because I talk a lot about problems with social skills for traumatic brain injury. So that may be the one group that really, really, really has a lot of trouble with emotional intelligence, and they have problems understanding the minds of other people. They have a very self-centered kind of view of things. A lot of traumatic, not all. There are quite a few who do fine, but I would say the majority of people with frontal lobe dysfunction, yeah, they have like no social skills. They'll blurt out whatever, hey, that lady is fat, no problem, and have no filter about hurting other people, no problem. And it doesn't bother them a whit. So it really depends. They're like five. They're like forever 5 years old.
Yep.
And so, but
is
sorry, I apologize.
Stroke
is different. Stroke is different.
Okay.
And it depends on where it is, whether it's the anterior communicating artery, which guess what area of the brain that affects, versus the parietal or occipital or temporal lobes. That's different. And they look different, or those who have an infection or something else. So again, each survivor is a little different, but frontal lobe, yeah, this is one group that I would have to disagree with you about. And me being a member of that group and me knowing my own social skills are rotten. So yeah.
Second, the motivation. There are many theories about motivation that point to why people do the things they do. For example, take the drive theory. When people are motivated to do an action to reduce the tension that is caused by unmet demands. You might be motivated to eat in order to reduce a state of hunger. But the drive theory is based on the idea that the body is working to maintain a certain balance. And the brain injured people ultimately know what they do to avoid certain behavior, for example, that causes their equilibrium. Wait a minute, my phone is ringing. Okay. You might be motivated to eat in order to reduce hunger, but the drive theory is based on the idea that the body is working to maintain a certain equilibrium. Brain injured people ultimately have know what causes, for example, to avoid scary behavior, and the causes for equilibrium to go haywire. Not at first, but after repetitive falls, for example. What do you think of that?
Mhm. I would say for the most basic drives, yeah. But adynamia is something we talk about, a lack of motivation. Like it's not laziness or a lack of, but a lot of us, I know for me, I mean, I can end up just kind of, like I want to do stuff, but I can't, shift myself into drive, and I'll just can sit for hours, empty. Um, so again, frontal lobe. I mean, the frontal lobe is mainly meant to help you with your higher social skills, and if that's ruined, so it depends. Again, each brain injury is different. So, I mean, this whole concept of the emotional intelligence, it depends. I would say if that area of your brain is spared that you need to do these social skills, yeah. But if that area is damaged, as it is for most people with traumatic brain injury, that these are the very things they're worst at, or their emotional intelligence. They're terrible. And many of them may tell you they're okay, but that's because the very systems that are needed to feed back to tell them you're doing lousy at this aren't working. They think they're great at it, but they're terrible at it because they're not getting the feedback telling them that they're terrible at it.
I'm going to guess that you're a perfectionist, right?
Uh, yeah, yeah, yes,
I'm a perfectionist too. I know one when I see one.
mhm.
So, does your perfectionism govern that?
Uh, um, I've gotten a little better, and what's interesting is I talk for Mount because my friend Kate is close enough that I can visit and we spend time together, we swim and stuff like that. We talk a lot, and she's a highly intelligent person. And when you deal with a survivor, and many of the people like on this channel, such as yourself, highly intelligent people with brain injury tend to be perfectionistic and tend to get down on themselves because it's like the thing is that um, we may not, our awareness of our deficits fluctuates. And she was talking with me about like because we can't, when you can't quite do as well as you did before, when things you get upset, you'll get angry with yourself, it's like frustration. So yeah, that kind of thing definitely affects um and measures into that. But as far as like the adynamia, that's neurological. That's neurological. Um, that isn't simply a psychological force. That is a neurological problem. That isn't, I'm afraid to act or whatever. That is, there's nothing going on at all. If I get into one of those modes where I'm just kind of staring, there's nobody home. Stacy will say, "Hey, what are you thinking, hon?" Nothing. I'm not thinking anything at that moment. I'm just kind of, busy signal because I'm we have two major networks of the brain whose job it is either to look inward or look outward. And the third major job is to switch us between the two, whether you need to solve a problem out there or solve a problem inward. And if that network whose job it is to decide switch, it's kind of stuck. You're not in either place. You're not in or out. You're kind of like in that liminal space between the two. And that's where you end up, you know, that's
Yeah.
neurological. That's frontal lobe injury, ventromedial.
The third one is empathy.
Yeah, that can be a problem too.
What did you say?
That can be a problem too with frontal lobe injury.
Yes. Empathy is the ability, plainly and simply, to put yourself in someone else's shoes, communicate that understanding back in return. It's a situation, it's an ability to understand people's situation and feelings from their point of view.
Right.
Many brain injured people say you can only know how this stroke or TPI is when you were there to see it for yourself. What do you think of that? That's true.
Here's the thing dealing with this. I'm sorry to be so contrary, but the thing is, it's like they're great at knowing themselves, but they tend to be very self-centered. Um, they can be
Such
very
a,
they can
yeah,
be
yeah,
well with brain injury, very selfish and
yeah.
self-centered. The problem is they don't mind running the feet off of somebody else to do this for me, do that, do this, do that. They don't notice when somebody else is tired, when somebody else is in pain, sad, whatever else, because it's me, 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 narcissistic very often. And that's a problem. They wonder why people leave them. Maybe if you actually cared enough to, and they can't. You hurt somebody else's feelings, you hurt somebody else by being rude or tactless when you talk to them. You run them around and then you don't bother to do something, show up, or whatever else. They can't get out of themselves. It's always only me, only me, only me. Frontal lobe injury, selfish and self-centered. And that is a severe frontal lobe problem. If you want people to understand your perspective, you've got to make the effort to understand theirs. And the problem is a frontal lobe injury. That's hard.
I know that myself because I tend to be self-centered.
And that's a problem. That
Most of
is
the
not a good
time.
thing. That is a bad thing.
No, it's a bad thing. That's a bad thing.
It's a very
I
bad thing.
hate it.
And that is
I
what
hate it.
destroys friendships and relationships. That is the friendship and relationship killer. Is it can't always and
Exactly.
only be about you.
Yep.
That is what kills our relationships.
Yep. I'm that way sometimes, and I hate that about myself. But I can't do change it.
Well, there are behavioral things you can do to change it. This is where, instead of meds, this is where Skinner, our buddy Skinner, comes in. Reminders. You need a concrete reminder to ask about the other person, to ask what you can do. Like a bracelet, like maybe a rubber band that you wear on your wrist, something to see you, to cue you. Oh, I wear that, so I will ask the other person. Um, a note on the fridge that literally says, have you asked how their day is going? Behavioral cues are very effective because how did you learn when you were a little kid? You were told and you were reinforced. You could self reinforce. You could have people in your life do it for you. It's no different. You just have to relearn it and not be pessimistic about it. And, there are solutions. It just requires using the techniques that you used when you're growing up. If you learned it once, you can learn it again. You just have to care enough about other people in your life to want to.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Mhm.
You can learn it again.
This
I
is how we
remember,
deal with rehab. This is one of my special focuses in rehab, is helping the psychosocial stuff. Because why are brain injury survivors lonely? It's because you can't be focused on yourself all the time. My wife reminds me I mess this up quite often because while I may, I'll what empathy. I want to quickly touch on this. Empathy is three pieces: feeling the other person's feelings, thinking the other person's thoughts, and being compassionate, which is different. Those are, even if you don't know their thoughts and feelings, you still help them because you know you want to physically help them if they're in distress. Anyone can be taught, even if they don't know, if they can't get inside the other person's head, and if they can't feel the other person's feels. If I know someone's carrying a ton of groceries, I'm going to go over and help them like carry the bags. That's behavior that can be taught easily. And so that's probably the first and easiest things you work on. It's like if you see your spouse coming with 1,000 bags of groceries, you go and you help them carry the groceries, regardless. If they're like nodding off, you say, "Hey, can I help you get to bed?" or whatever, regardless. And you can teach those behaviors immediately. Teach compassionate empathy. That can be taught. The other thing that can be taught is cognitive empathy, to kind of think the other person. That's where these cues that I was talking to. The hard one is to teach empathic empathy, the feel the other person's feels. That's hard if that's lost because you have to learn to recognize your own feelings first. Because many times we misidentify our feelings because we don't recognize our own emotions. We first have to, and that's called dysthymia. And dyslexia is like, it means no stories, quite literally, and it means because we don't recognize our own feels. And many times we'll confuse our own emotions for pain. When you're feeling depressed or whatever else, you'll interpret that as physical pain. And there are ways to treat that too. QEEG and neurofeedback and stuff like that can help you recognize what is real pain and what is emotional pain. And then you talk, oh, this is when like a brain injury survivor may be yelling at somebody and it's like, I'm not angry. It's like, sure you are. You're yelling. Whenever you're doing that, you're angry. But
this is a reminder with some people want to talk about their pain, their injury, and don't come back to meetings anymore. That's a fact. They don't come back.
right, it's complicated. This is a whole field in neuroscience, is dealing with the very things you're talking about here. It's an area I'm interested in because there are solutions. It's just you need to understand the neurological mechanisms as well as the psychological behind it. You need to understand the neuroscience in order to fix it. And but you don't need pills for it. Yeah, they can help, but really be classic Skinnerian behaviorism. A psychologist is better equipped to help with this because coming up with applied behavioral analysis and an intervention journal and like stuff like this. Um, but yeah, there are ways to treat these problems. They're not without hope. These are actually some of the more. These are some of the things that are more amenable to treatment. And what's interesting is lack of recognition of facial expressions, fear and anger. A survivor not recognizing fear and anger in people's faces is a problem because it leads them to making these social mistakes. Um, if you can teach them to recognize fear and anger in faces, they're less likely to make these mistakes. It's part of cognitive rehab.
I get that. I get that. So the fourth one is self-awareness. From people with self-awareness can recognize, for example, their strengths and weaknesses, understand and talk about their needs and feelings, and recognize other people's needs and feelings. We see how their behavior affects others. Um, Develop a growth mindset and learn from their mistakes. Brain injured people to should be able to accomplish all the lists, just one or two. But I should have before, but I mean, the first one, but comment on that, Mark, because I know you have many examples.
Yeah, and what's interesting to make here is should be able to. Should be able to, yeah, but often don't because of a condition called prosopagnosia, which is a lack of recognition of your own problems. If you don't recognize that you have these problems, that if you think you're fine, it's again like balance syndrome, Anton's, where you will, if you're blind, cortically blind, and you think you're perfectly fine, if you think you can drive, and yes, that does happen. And there's always a reason, an explanation. The brain makes up a story to tell why you
Oh,
can't see
always.
at the moment.
Yep.
Yeah. And this reflects the fact that the area of the brain, and I have a video where I talk about this, and it's not denial. Psychological denial is different because eventually that falls apart. But prosopagnosia, I'm sorry, anosognosia, forgive me, anosognosia. Prosopagnosia is difficulty recognizing faces. Anosognosia is lack of awareness of illness. And that has to do with this area of the brain right here, the medial aspects. And that's kind of like the self simulator, other simulator. It kind of tells you by its communication between here and the insula, it tells you how you're doing. Gee, maybe there shouldn't be finger in the salad as I'm cutting it. Maybe I cut a little too deep. It gives you that feedback. But if those white matter fiber links are broken, you're not getting that feedback. And this is why the awareness. And if somebody is getting upset with you, you're not getting the feedback that, hey, that means you're screwing up socially. And you may blame them or, not take responsibility. 85% of all women who are in jail for violent crimes have brain injury. 60% of men who are in jail for violent crimes have brain injury. Why do you think that is?
They can't
Because
help it. They can't
their
help it.
their social systems are all broken.
Yep.
Now, despite being as kind of negative sounding or seeming here, there is good news. There are things that can be done. A lot of the behavioral. If you learn it once, you can learn it twice. Um, it takes a lot more effort, and there may be people who just find it easier to walk away from you. This is why so many friendships are lost. This is why even your family will disappear on you many times. You're unaware that you're acting like a jerk, or you're unaware that you're not interacting well with the people around you. They may have even told you, but you forget. Or, these kind of things. We are partly, if not mostly, responsible for our own situations. And so if someone's telling you something, maybe pay attention to it. I'm sorry to be more blunt spoken, but because there are things that can be done. And one of the sad things about this whole thing is that it sometimes takes a long time. It did for me, and I'm still not, like perfectly attuned or anything like that. My social skills still really suck. But they're better. And I have a very patient wife, who's kind, compassionate, understanding. And it's like I have majority of my friends have brain injury. And it's like sometimes we bash heads with each other, not literally, and other times we get along very, very well. It just depends. And because we perform like this, some days we're on cycle, and if we take our meds and we're doing like the stuff we should, we do well. Other days, not so good. And so it's hit or miss. Some days we do great. Other days, some weeks we do great. Other weeks, not so great. And it's because we have trouble with knowing the mind of the other or knowing the feels. And sometimes, it's like, look at like Lisa's love languages, which we have up. And that's an important thing too. We may communicate instead of verbally, through our actions. It's kind of like if you took a person with ADHD and a kid with autism, you kind of put them in a blender, and what you got out of that, other than a big mess, personality wise, and maybe a few drops of narcissism in there. That is what to expect from frontal lobe injury. But not every brain injury is the same. Not every stroke is the same. And many stroke survivors do not have these kind of symptoms because they don't have a frontal stroke. They don't have it in the anterior communicating artery, which is about here. And it kind of forks off. For traumatic brain injury survivors, I guarantee about 99% of us have frontal lobe injuries. You can even see like the discoloration of my skin and just a very, very faint scarring. But, and it also affects my left side because it was kind of, it was bilateral. But fortunately it was higher up. And they said the neuropsych said I must have like had my head turned at the moment. So it went like the energy went straight from here back. I don't know. I was unconscious, but each brain injury is different. So not everyone will have the same problems. And even those who have frontal lobe symptoms will have different constellations of symptoms. The other thing I want to stress is this. Brain injury is an explanation. It is not an excuse. I always say that. So if somebody is treating you poorly, whether you're the survivor or whether you're a caretaker, you don't have to put up with that shit. Don't ever let anyone abuse you or mistreat you. You know how I feel about abuse. Whether yelling, screaming at you, whether throwing things, whether hitting you, or stonewalling you, or gaslighting you, or any of those things. You don't have to take it. You can leave. Either side, whether survivor or whether caretaker, unless they're willing to get help. Both sides. And that applies to if you're a survivor, you don't have to tolerate that crap. And same thing for a caretaker. I don't care if I have brain injury. If they're not willing to get the help, you don't have to take that. Neither side.
The fifth one is self-regulation. In psychology today, a doctor said a consistent self-regulation requires focus on deepest values rather than feelings. It's also the best way to feel better. Violation of values invariably produces bad feelings, or fidelity to them eventually makes you feel more authentic and empowered. In other words, taking feelings out of that picture, what is the right thing to do? Most brain injured people are at least 1,000 I met online are more patient and really compassionate, doing what is right to do, the core values, rather than focusing on feelings which make you angrier, frustrated, more hateful. And you want to know, I wanted to know the healthcare providers. What about the healthcare providers? To all of you, there was a study in University of Kentucky that included as far as healthcare goes, the researchers said that a healthcare professional satisfaction with his or own life and his or own personal happiness as a component of maximizing the patient's satisfaction with health care services. Would you agree with that, Mark?
Definitely. Yeah, no. And I know brain injury survivors who are medical professionals like myself. And that most definitely is something. If you feel that attachment, if you still feel that compassion, but burnout is astronomically high. Docs are quitting. 1 out of 5 physicians has been quitting. It's 1 out of 4 nurses right now, but it's like terrible. It's not just in the United States, it's elsewhere because you're a button pusher and a paper signer nowadays. You're lost contact with the patients because of insurance regulations and everything else. Yeah, it's terrible. And yeah, it bleeds through to your patients. You gotta get them out in 15, 20 minutes because the insurance company, is like, yeah, and administration wants you to turn over because you got to make money for the hospital. It's terrible. Let me be blunt. I wouldn't advise anyone go into medicine or nursing right now with things the way they are.
Read my book. Yes, so many doctors and nurses were emotionally abusive. They didn't realize it. Maybe they did, but most of them didn't. They were emotionally abusive.
They're burned
I
out.
took it. Yeah.
I mean, abusive implies that they know, that it's intentional, um, or that it's for the sake of. I think they've lost their compassion. They just don't care anymore because they've lost contact with it is that makes practicing medicine an art anymore. It's a factory job because of the way that big corporations have changed, have taken that, pull the soul out of medicine, pull the soul out of nursing, pull the soul out of psychology. All these professions are not what they were. It's terrible. But yeah, they do. I agree with you. They don't, it's like we've lost contact with the human factor for our patients. It's terrible. And
Emotional.
as a brain injury
Oh,
survivor, as well as a medical professional, it's like double difficult. I don't know. Ask me why I'm doing this right now instead. It's a way I
social
can help serve.
skills. Social skills, motivation, empathy, self-awareness, self-regulation, self-awareness and empathy and self-regulation and social skills and motivation are all part of that. So you have to have all five to be emotionally intelligent. But some people can't. Some people can't. Neurologically, they can't. You will agree with that? Of course you would.
Definitely.
Yep.
Um, yeah. But the thing I do want to make sure to end this on an optimistic note, unlike um, the traditional notion of IQ, like cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence can be relearned if you've lost it and can be sharpened and developed.
I
You
agree
can
with
learn,
that.
but EQ can be learned. It's hard to test for. There's really no like specific instruments for other than these vague like Likert scales, but emotional intelligence can be learned by with a lot of practice and hard work, and you relearn it like you did when you were a kid. Maybe without the swat to the butt and the embarrassment from your parents, but with persistence and with somebody help you out. And like I said, simple cues to like ask the other person how they're doing or ask if you can help. Maybe a bright yellow rubber band around your wrist. Something simple to say to remember the other person. That's simple. Maybe worth an experiment, Joyce. See if that helps you.
Yeah. I'm bad on that. I say my piece and that's it. I'm go away. But work on that. Thank you.
But what I'm suggesting is you try something like that.
Yes.
See if it
Thank
works.
you.
Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Like, well, again, I do a lot of like it's like when I work with brain injury survivors, I do that. Um, you know, because that's what destroys friendships is that if you only focus on yourself. And that is a problem because you can't think of the other person's perspective. And this is a problem not just for brain injury survivors. The internet has made us this way. One button, click, 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 I'm done. And so it's affected this whole country. Communication like this is very impersonal and there's no consequences for screwing it up.
Yep.
So this is even harder on brain injury survivors because we need more things more direct. We don't process abstraction very well. All right. Thank you. A very insightful kind of like But these are important things and to offer hope. If you have any questions for Joyce, please down below. If you want to talk about emotional intelligence, a very complex topic, but definitely something to be explored, and probably one of those areas that is most disabling if you're not good at it. And probably one of the most impaired areas, and one of the areas that leaves us lonely and isolated if we don't work on it. And yes, you can work on it. And I always stress about domestic violence and violence in general, about being safe. Working on these skills is one of those areas. And don't ever let anyone be abusive towards you, whether caretaker or survivor. Always look out for your safety, and make sure you have strong boundaries as a survivor. Things that are not acceptable, make sure you lay those rules down for yourself. Things which are not acceptable, and as a caretaker, and stick to them. It's essential. All right. So I will say goodbye. Hope you have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.